Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Expats in Ukraine with your host, me, Corey. Today, my guest, he is from the US, he is a blogger, and he's an American dude. His name is Peter Alexeyevich. He's popular on TikTok. That's where I found him. And yeah, how you doing, Pete? Can I call you Pete?
Oh, absolutely. Dude, how could I be any better? I'm all ramped up on sleep deprivation, caffeine, and existential dread. So let's do this.
And I'm sure the heat is not helping much, right?
Oh, dude, I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, it's summer. It's summer in Kyiv, and it's a record breaker.
Yeah, I mean, it feels worse than summer. Is there a worse heat than summer? I don't know. But
I don't know. Were you born on the sun?
yeah, it's basically the only hotter place right now. But what I like to do, I like to do an icebreaker to introduce, you to the guests that are watching, I guess, audience that are watching. So I'll say two options right now, and then you pick one.
Sure.
And tell me which one you like better, okay? So, yogurt or smetana?
Oh, well, what are we eating?
Whatever you want, Peter.
I mean, yogurt or smetana. If I'm having fajitas, I want smetana. If I'm having, some falafel or something, I want some yogurt for that.
Okay, check it out. I'm God, and I say, Peter, only one of these can exist, ever. I'm going to delete the other one from humanity. What are you choosing?
I'm choosing to be an atheist. That's not a God I want to believe in.
Now I'm going to delete you.
Perfect. I'll no longer be troubled by this.
Okay. So it's too tough of a decision, huh?
Dude, how could you? No, I love them both.
Okay. I understand, but I would pick smetana if you're asking me.
You would.
But nobody's asking me.
You're addicted to borscht.
Yeah, exactly, man. But next. So Golden Corral or Puzata Hata?
Yeah, no. I'm not. Look,
You're not
I
gonna
know
make this easy,
everybody
are
in
you?
Ukraine loves Puzata Hata. It's their favorite thing. Just like for us as kids, we went to McDonald's, right? It's terrible food, but we love it. And it's the same thing with Puzata Hata. It's terrible
It's not that
food.
bad. It's
no,
not
it's
that
terrible.
bad.
Dude. It's terrible. You have to go there at least
Okay,
once.
well, what about Golden Corral then?
Golden Corral is the worst. Oh my God.
Where you have to pick one or the other. You're not going to make this easy, are you?
I'm not going to either of those places. If we're going out to eat, it's not going to be Golden Corral.
You have to pick one.
Puzata Hata because it's exotic.
Good guy, man. You're going to get like a lot of fans now after you trashed Smetana. Oh, no, you didn't trash Smetana. Okay, you just didn't pick it. All right, next. Bud Light or Lvivsky?
Oh, Lvivsky.
Lvivsky, okay. I like that answer. And last question. Scranton or Kyiv?
Oh, the place of my birth and the home of my heart.
Exactly.
For right now, obviously, the choice is Kyiv.
Kyiv, okay.
Because I could be in Scranton if I wanted to be, and I am not. I'm here.
It's so interesting that this was an easier decision than smetana and yogurts.
Way easier because I took action, right? Like I'm actually here. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll ask the $1 million question. What brought you to Ukraine?
Do I get $1 million for this question?
If you answer it properly.
Oh, wow. I came to Ukraine because I think it's the most important thing happening in the world right now. When I think about the geopolitical space, there is no conflict on earth that has the implications of the conflict here in Ukraine, 1,000-kilometer front line in Europe. No, this is the most important thing happening in the world right now.
Okay, and when did you move here?
I came here for the 1-year anniversary of the full-scale invasion. So I arrived on February 24th, 2023.
Okay, so can you tell me about, before you arrived, what were you doing in the U.S.? What was your life like?
So I had a great life in the United States, right? As so many of us do. I'm, not embarrassed to say. I had my son and I, because my life was all about my son and I. My ex-wife left when he was not yet 2. And so it was him and me against the world for 17 years. And there were 2 inciting incidents that made it possible for me to consider this as an option. In 2019, he graduated high school and he went off to his life, which is great because that's what we raise our children for, right? Is to be able to leave and go and contribute to the world. And he's doing that in spades. And so I'm very proud of him. And then the other thing that happened was we suffered a tragic house fire. My house burned down. I lost everything. And so as I'm trying to recover from that, I look at what's happening in the world, and I'm increasingly interested in what's happening in Ukraine, and increasingly convinced, in a kind of naive and arrogant American way, that maybe I could be helpful in some way if I came. So I found a cultural organization here, and I agreed to volunteer with them for 3 months. And that was the initial thing that brought me to Ukraine.
Okay. And what did you know about Ukraine before you came? I mean, you got inspired, I guess, by, the full scale invasion, but what did you know about Ukraine before then?
So there's a great meme, right? What I knew about Ukraine before the full-scale invasion. Maybe Chernobyl is here? And then the next panel is like every detail of the war and everything, right?
Yeah.
And like most Americans, I really did not know much about this part of the world or what was happening here until just before the full-scale invasion, when things started to get telegraphed that the invasion was coming. Then I started to look at it and I started to watch it. And for the first full year of the full-scale invasion, dude, I learned so much. I read Borderlands. I read Bloodlands. I read a bunch. The Life and Lies of Vladimir Putin, The Accidental Tsar. I read so much trying to get an understanding of what was happening here. And I just became obsessed with the commentary. So by the time I got here, I had a good understanding of the geopolitical situation. But a year prior to that, I thought Odessa was a Russian city.
You thought Odessa was only in Texas.
I've been to Odessa, Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But because what put Ukraine on my map for the first time was in 2014. Yeah, I was dating this Russian girl. Forgive me, guys. I was dating this Russian girl, but this is before all of this aggression. And yeah, we were with her friends, and they were all talking about this, an annexation of Crimea. And they were fine with it. They're saying the Russian people there, it's fine. And I didn't have any kind of, geopolitical sense. And I was like, okay, whatever you guys say. And then I started seeing, a bunch of stuff on the news, the Euromaidan revolution. Did you see anything on the news about that where you were?
Dude, I learned all about that in the year leading up to my coming here.
Oh, wow.
In 2014, remember, I'm a single dad, right? And my son was 12 years old, which meant he was just in middle school, getting ready to transition to high school. Full-time football player, full-time swimmer. My whole life. I mean, seriously, man, if it happened between 2004 and 2019 and my son was not interested in it, I didn't know about it. I missed every cultural touchstone and even major political happenings, like the annexation of Crimea. It's possible I knew about it happening at the time, but there was no way that I understood the political ramifications.
Of course. Have you seen that documentary, Winter on Fire? It was on Netflix.
No, I haven't. I've been meaning to.
Yeah, it's on Netflix, man. You should watch it. It was, when I first moved to Ukraine in 2015. I saw this documentary. I'm like, oh, wow. And this was fresh, it just happened like the year prior, something like this. Such a good documentary. I definitely recommend it. But yeah, so what pushed you to be like, I need to go to Ukraine. I need to be in Ukraine. And how did you handle this process?
Well, like I said, I became an empty nester in 2019. So after 15 years or 17 years of me and the boy, suddenly I was alone in the house. Then there was the fire, and I was displaced from my house.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And one of the things that I was thinking in that year of watching the war unfold on TV after the full-scale invasion, one of the things that I did think to myself was the fact that I had recently suffered the loss of everything through the hand of fate, right? The freak accident, no fault of my own. I did feel that it's not the same as the losses that the Ukrainians have suffered, but I've been in that place where you're sitting in your own garden with your dog, watching your entire life turn into smoke in front of your eyes and not having any idea what's going to happen next.
Mm-hmm.
So
What year was this?
the fire was December 10th of 2019.
2019. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
So just a couple years later, right after COVID, the full-scale invasion happens. I spend a year watching it unfold on TV. And then I'm in a bar in Erie, Pennsylvania. And I'm with some friends, and we're talking in loud voices about Ukraine and how the government isn't doing enough and we should be doing more and all this stuff. And the bartender comes over and drops our wings, because there's great wings in Erie, Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, Petey, you're listening to all the wrong people. There's no war in Ukraine.
Oh, wow.
It's all a hoax so the Biden crime family can launder money.
Wow.
Now, I'm in a bar in Erie, Pennsylvania, having hot wings and Budweisers, and I'm hearing Russian propaganda from a guy I know for 10 years. Like, unbelievable, dude.
Yeah.
No joke. We got our wings to go. We didn't stay. I never set foot in that bar again. We went back to my place, and when my friends left, I got online. I booked a flight to Kyiv. I booked a sleeper car to Kyiv. Or I'm sorry, I booked a flight to Warsaw. Sorry. I booked a flight to Warsaw and a sleeper car to Kyiv.
Okay.
And then I spent the next 6 weeks figuring out what I would do when I got here. And that's when I got in touch with a bunch of NGOs and then came here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was actually just having a discussion with a childhood friend last night, and he was messaging me about how he's going to vote for Trump. And he was typically left leaning basically his whole life. He's like, I voted for Biden last election, but everything's worse now. Gas prices are up, and you know what? Corey, I feel sorry you're in Ukraine. Russia could easily take over Ukraine. They just sent their C-list people and C-list army, and I'm like thinking like I can't talk to this guy anymore. Like, there's no reasoning with someone this delusional and crazy. I know, it's so crazy how kind of this propaganda has like seeped into like average normal people that have I don't know.
Corey, it's not crazy.
Yeah.
It's the plan.
Yeah.
Right? 10 years ago, you and I, we could not imagine a world where a foreign adversary would think that it was a good idea to spend $1.9 billion a year paying people to pretend to be Americans and say anti-American shit in social media, right? Lenin talked about the many useful idiots in the West and how they could turn those people with money or promises of power or compromise. But today, the Kremlin has harnessed the power of the internet to get an army of useful idiots to buy into this bullshit that America is a failing state, that America is weak, that wokeness is a delusion, right? That there's such a thing as Donald Trump derangement syndrome, rather than just the klaxon bell warning of a threat to our democratic institutions and our very future.
Yeah, but why do you think Americans are so susceptible to this type of propaganda?
That is a great question. That is a great question.
I talked to a lot of people in Europe, and they're not as, I guess maybe it's because they're so far away. Americans so far away. It's like isolationist. A lot of people don't have passports. They don't even travel to get a different perspective, and their views never get challenged. But are there any other reasons you can think of? Because it seems like Americans are the ones that are the loudest, I guess, with this Russian propaganda talking points.
I think there's probably a couple of things there. I think there has been a much more concerted effort on the part of the Russians, as far as we understand it, to pour that disinformation fire hose into the brains of Americans. Then there's, I don't know if you read any Mark Twain, but do you remember Innocents Abroad?
Oh, yeah, I heard about it. I didn't read it. No.
Because America's so freaking big, man, right? I mean, if you're in the center of America, you can drive, 3,000 kilometers in any direction, and everybody speaks American English. All the same stores and shops are there, right? It's a whole world unto itself, and we are so naive. We really believe that the whole rest of the world is just like us.
Yeah.
We do not understand our place in the world at all. Not at all. And that's a problem. Then I think too, you're looking at a world where for the last 40 years, the Republican Party has been chipping away at the American educational system.
Mhm.
And it's a real problem. That's a real problem. But I think social media and America's addiction to social media created an environment in which these echo chambers were possible. And then you get stuck because if you buy into the first premises, then everything else follows logically. Even though the end result is an abnegation of the very principles that created the free and tolerant society that you are enjoying this conversation in. A conversation that would never be allowed in Russia,
Yeah.
you know?
But what is the best way to combat this type of disinformation? Just through education? What if people are already too far gone?
So that is the problem.
Yeah.
That is the problem, because if we can't agree on what a fact is, then, you know, we're done. We can't talk to each other. And right now we can't agree on facts. And that's a problem.
Well, that's the thing. A fact is a fact. It's not an opinion. It's not like I believe this. No, it's a fact. It's been proven, and you're
Yep.
disagreeing with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The human species is a poorly evolved primate species that can be quite immune to facts. That's a thing that we see. One of the three guiding principles of everything that I do on the Tickety Talk,
Tickety talk.
the Tickety Talk, is the channel exists to disambiguate Russian disinformation. And there's a lot of guys like me out there that just look at the Russian disinformation, put it up against the facts, and try to educate the American people every day, and a Western audience too. About 33% of my audience is Western Europe. But primarily Americans, educate them about the way they're being lied to and why they've got to reject that lie and why facts are so important.
Oh yeah, I was watching a bit of your live on TikTok last night, because typically you go live at night, right?
I go live at 5 Eastern Standard Time, Monday through Saturday.
Oh yeah, nighttime Kyiv time, I mean. But
Nighttime, local time, it's midnight, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I saw it, and typically you're talking about politics, you're talking about current events, you're talking about the headlines, and you have hundreds of people watching you. Yeah, and I guess you have like a lot of engaged, like a big engaged audience, right?
I have a highly engaged audience.
Yeah. I got introduced to you through this guy PT.
Oh, PT82.
Yeah, so basically he messaged me on Reddit because I posted like some short form content on Reddit in the Ukraine subreddit on Fridays. They have this Art Friday, so I published one of my videos there. PT, he liked it. He messaged me and he said, "Hey, is it fine if I publish it on TikTok, or do you have TikTok?" And I said, "I don't." I'm like, "Yeah, you can go ahead and publish it, but maybe I'll create a TikTok." And he goes, "Yeah, do it." And so I created one, and he kind of gave me some tips. And then he gathered his audience, and a lot of them followed me. I published more videos, and he goes, "By the way, there's this guy, Peter. Maybe you can follow him, check him out." And this is how I got introduced to you, through PT. Yeah.
So PT has been one of the moderators on my TikTok channel for 9 months now. Dude, this guy shows up every night and is there for an hour every night, making sure that when the Russians come in, because they come in,
Yeah.
right? When the Russians come in and start talking shit, they're gone. They're gone. And because of that, I'm still on the air, because I don't respond well to it.
Of course, man. Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember somebody. So I used to work at some other media, I guess media companies, and one of them I was working for, this journalist that was coming in to do kind of a presentation. He's from the UK, and then he asked, are you guys just one-sided kind of media? You only show a narrative from Ukraine? Isn't that kind of like, bad because you don't show both sides? And then the chief editor, or the editor-in-chief, she said, "Well, would you, if someone was raped, would you, get to the story of like the victim, and then would you like to hear like the reasoning of the rapist? What does it matter what this person has to say? Like, they're evil, they've done bad." I don't know. It was a very like dramatic kind of example, but it kind of
No,
like,
it's perfect.
Yeah.
It's the perfect example, right? Because it goes to the point, especially in the United States, we have this First Amendment right to free speech. And so people should be able to say what they want, right? And this may be one of the reasons, right? This may be one of the reasons why Americans are more susceptible to this shit. Because the Russians have leveraged these angels of our better nature, right? This right to free speech that is so sacred and so precious to us, and used it against us with a disinformation fire hose of lies, misinformation, malinformation, and propaganda. And one of those is the two sides myth. We always think there's two sides to every story.
Yeah.
Oh, what did she say? Right. In this instance, as in no other crisis I can think of on earth right now, there is very clearly an aggressor, and I'm not going to. I don't want to use the word victim, right? Because Ukraine is not a victim, but Ukraine is the defender. And
why don't you want to say Ukraine is a victim?
I don't want to say Ukraine is a victim because there's the idea of the victim as powerless. And
okay.
Ukraine, right, like in your example of sexual assault, the victim was powerless to stop it from happening. And so we don't give a what the rapist has to say.
Yeah.
And I think that should be the case with Ukraine as well. But the distinction in these analogies is that Ukraine has both the will and the means to fend off this aggressor. I pray anyway.
Yeah. And so, you have quite a following on TikTok. How did you grow your following? Did you just make content every day and just talk about the war, do updates? How did you get into it as well?
So it happened entirely by accident. I came for 3 months, and I was talking to friends at home and telling these stories of what was happening over here and what I was experiencing. And my buddy Travis, who is on TikTok, said to me, "You should get on TikTok and tell people these things." And I said, "I'm not a 13-year-old girl. What are you talking about? Get on TikTok." And he's like, "No, seriously, trust me. TikTok will be good for you." I'm like, "Okay." So I tried it. And the very first video that I put out,
with dancing videos, right?
I started with challenge videos, right? And the very first video I did, I think, was about the air raid that night.
Okay.
And I wake up in the morning and there's a text from my buddy that I had 600 views. I'm like, I had 600 views? Get out of here. And so I kept going. And there's so much misinformation. There's so much disinformation that when the channel started to take off, we evolved the reasons for the channel to guide us, right? Number one, disambiguate Russian disinformation. Number two, keep Ukraine in the news. This became particularly important after things exploded in Gaza. And then finally, to act as an intersection point where people who are interested in supporting Ukraine or doing work on behalf of Ukraine can meet each other and cross-pollinate activities. And the channel is dedicated to those things. And almost immediately, there were guys like PT, like Cheyenne, Vanetta, who came out of the woodwork and agreed that this was a thing to do. And without their support in those early days, because, as an American, you can only be here for 3 months. Then you have to get a visa.
Yeah.
So I initially decided to stay for 3 months, try the TikTok thing, and I got the 3-month visa. At the end of the 3 months, I was getting a lot of death threats.
On TikTok?
From TikTok.
Oh, wow.
And I really mean, like, one night my WhatsApp rang and I picked it up, and there's a guy there telling me he's going to gut me in front of the restaurant that's outside my apartment. Like, he's going to gut me on the street like a fish.
Wow.
And I got to tell you, man, the only thing I thought was, I must really be pissing somebody off. So I must be doing the right thing.
Yeah.
If you want to know who you are, look at your enemies. I am pleased and privileged to have the Russians as my enemy.
Why do you think they hate you so much?
I think because
I get like a lot of foul comments, but never any death threats.
you never got a death threat.
No, just a
Dude.
bunch of comments how stupid I am. I should go home. Maybe I should go fight in the war. I don't know. They're confused.
Oh, I'm,
Yeah.
I get all of those. And you know why people like my channel? Because I delete all those comments.
Oh, okay.
I don't leave any Russian lies in my comments. I don't leave any Russian disinformation in my comments. Personal insults, threats against people's lives, none of that stays in my comments.
Aren't you scared that creates an echo chamber then? I mean, not disinformation. You can delete that. But doesn't it create an echo chamber?
Anybody that offers a valid argument, right? I'm happy to entertain in counterpoint, but it's got to be a valid argument. But like, it's a fiction that Ukraine can
yeah,
win.
Of course. Delete this. Yeah.
It's pointless.
Yeah.
It's pointless. And all it does is put 10 rubles in some jerk's pocket, right? Generally speaking.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't want to contribute to that. So bang, it's gone. So I do a lot of content curation that other folks do not do.
And how often do you, how much time do you invest in TikTok? Is this like kind of your hobby? This is how you make your living right now?
My buddy Travis, after I got on TikTok, said to me, "It's weird that you treat this like a job," but that's, you know, that's who I am. If I'm doing something, I want to do it right.
Of course, yeah.
And so my mornings generally start with me reading the news from the night before. What the air raid happened, what happened with the air raid, who's been injured, what's been damaged, what hits have happened. And it takes me to do the half-hour news program that I do every evening. It takes me about 4 hours every day to put that together.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, I'm publishing videos. So that's another 3 to 4 hours a day easily. So it's a full-time gig, man.
Yeah. And you monetize, right? This is I'm not at 10K yet, so I can't monetize my content, but you're over 10K.
Yeah,
like
but
well
dude,
over.
don't expect any money from the TikTok creator rewards program. I think last month with close to 1 million views. No, last month was a bad month. I had 250,000 views, and I think I made $74.
$74?
Yeah, it is not a path. It is not a path to independent wealth.
Of course. But do you know who Joe Lindsley is?
I do not know Joe Lindsay.
So he was a previous guest on my podcast, like actually one of my first guests, and he's from the U.S. He used to work for Fox News. He was a reporter, journalist. He was friends with Rupert Murdoch, and then they had like a falling out over some scandal. Anyway, he moved to Ukraine, and his shtick is every day he reports on the war, you know, from Ukraine, from Kyiv, and he won't stop until the war is over. So it's like similar to kind of what you're doing. You know, every day you read the articles, you talk about, you know, the current events, what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening like in Russia, what's happening in the US, and how it's like all connected. So that's like his thing.
It is connected.
Yeah.
I'm very much the same, right? I came for that initial 3 months, but then for a year, every 3 months, I renewed my visa because you have to do it every 3 months. And then finally, I'm like, look, let's just get the year temporary residency.
Yeah.
So at this juncture, I tell people that I am committed to not leaving Ukraine before the Russians do. Until I've picnicked on a beach in Crimea, I'm not fucking leaving.
Yeah. And I mean, they're terrorizing the country as well. They're attacking the infrastructure. And I seen on one of your videos, you were talking about how, you know, the nuclear power plants, I believe they're repairing it. But how do you deal with the blackouts, man? Because at the flat I'm staying in Kyiv with a friend, it's like, I don't know, 6 hours maximum. And there's like times on DTEC. DTEC is this electrical kind of grid. Anyways, it's like a website. They have a page on the website where it shows you kind of the blackout time. It's like 100%, maybe, and then for sure there's lights. And the maybes, it's always never. And so I only get like 4 or 6 hours of electricity. How are you dealing with it, man?
Just 2 days ago, it was a 19-hour day with no electricity.
Wow.
Right? 19 hours straight. Not even like, you know how you get the 2-hour break in the middle usually?
Yeah.
No, 19 hours straight. And it's It's not being shot at in a trench. Like, we are not the ones, right? It's inconvenient. It grinds. It has a slow grinding effect on the society because connections are missed. Hours at work don't happen. People don't get shit done that they need to get done for their lives. It just grinds everybody down, which is what it's intended to do, right?
Yeah, of course.
Make no mistake. And of course, put elderly people at risk because they can't run their air conditioners. Just outrageous. That's why it's against the Geneva Convention.
Yeah.
Let's not forget, these are war crimes.
I mean, Russia doesn't care. They bombed a children's hospital.
Oh my
Yeah,
God, dude.
What do they care about electricity?
They bombed the children's hospital the day that the NATO 75th anniversary summit was happening, and we still didn't offer Ukraine NATO membership. It's a
Yeah.
problem. It's a problem.
They keep talking about they don't want to escalate. And then Joe, when I had Joe on the cast, he was saying, why do we putting lines in the sand? Why do they keep putting lines in the sand for us? We should be putting lines in the sand for them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. We have failed completely to deter Vladimir Putin. But Vladimir Putin is doing a great job at deterring us.
Yeah.
No ATACMS use over the border. No Western weapons over the border.
Yeah.
Keir Starmer says, go ahead, use the storm shadows. And immediately his government rolls that back. And it's fear-based.
Yeah.
Right? Russia's got 6,000 nukes. Nobody wants to see this thing go nuclear. And we have, I think, in the extant diplomatic corps and kind of the halls of power, these people that have been around since the Cold War, like Biden, right? There is this image in our minds of Russia as the number 2 in the world. But they were never the number 2 in the world. The USSR might have been for a while, but we bankrupted that shit, and that's over. And Russia is no inheritor of the USSR. They might have the nukes. I don't know how many of them work, but I know that the United States nuclear stockpile works. You know how I know? Because we spend 5 times as much on the maintenance of our nuclear arsenal as the Russians do. And much less of our budget gets stolen. So there is no way in hell that Russia's nukes work, most of them.
Well, I mean, it doesn't take 6,000 nukes to wipe out humanity.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
That's the problem, and that's why everybody is afraid.
Yeah. But do you think Putin is suicidal? Like, for example, he shoots a nuke, he knows there's going to be retaliation.
No, I don't think he is. And I don't think he wants to be the guy that goes down in history as responsible for the destruction of either Russia or the world. He doesn't want that. And everybody around him.
Then why aren't the U.S. and the allies calling his bluff?
That is the great question. That is the great question. Now, the positive side of me says that it's an endemic, entrenched fear. And everybody's just scared, right? I remember as a kid having those post-apocalyptic survival dreams where it's just me and my friends in a radioactive landscape, right? But the cynic in me worries. The cynic in me worries, Corey, that there are powers that be that want to use Ukraine to bleed Russia dry and really bankrupt them so that they are no longer a threat in the world, but to do it at the expense of Ukrainian blood.
Yeah, I mean, this is a common conspiracy.
It's a batshit crazy conspiracy theory that I do not want to believe. But it does worry me because the practical implication of what we have here is just that. Our refusal to say that we want Ukraine to win, that we want to defeat Russia, our refusal to give Ukraine what it needs to win is the biggest concern that I have.
Well, yeah, I mean, have you heard of the phrase boiling the frog?
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically it's not as crazy, not as wild as conspiracy theory that you were mentioning that you don't want to believe, but it's similar that they don't want, they don't want Russia to escalate the war. So they do everything like slowly. So Russia doesn't even notice that all of a sudden now they're using ATACMS in, Russia. Whereas before that was a line in the sand, but they did it so slowly over the last couple of years that it's fine now.
I mean,
believe in this?
remember at the beginning, what were we sending? We were sending helmets and flak jackets and tourniquets, non-lethal aid.
Yeah, I mean, the West expected Ukraine to fall.
Dude, I
They
totally
waited, and then once they saw that Ukraine was fighting back, this is when they're like, okay, wow, they have a chance. Let's go help them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, I remember when the story of the Hostomel airport came out
Yeah.
and how they defended the airport, and it was so exciting. And then we saw that line of tanks, right?
Yeah.
Like 41 kilometers worth of APCs and tanks and fuel
Yeah.
trucks dead on the road.
Well, yeah, they didn't have enough fuel because they didn't expect it to be like this delayed. And I was talking to another guy because he was like an expert in this, and he was saying that so these trucks, you can't just turn them on and off whenever you want. You have to keep them idling. And since they couldn't enter the city as soon as they could, they ran out of gas. But once you put the gas in one, then it idles, and you have to put the one before that, and then it just created a big kind of stopped column.
Yeah.
Because they didn't expect, it to take this long.
I think it's important to remember, too, that there were some smart-ass Belarusians who stole all that gas and sold it off on the black market.
You said smart?
Smart ass.
Oh,
I
smart
said.
ass. Okay.
So there were some corrupt Belarusians who stole a bunch of those fuel trucks and sold it off on the black market in Belarus. And if that hadn't happened, they might have made it. But that did happen.
Yeah. But because I used to live not too far from Irpin, Bucha, and Hostomel. My flat with my ex-girlfriend, it was in. Are you familiar with Kotsubinski?
I am not.
Okay, Kotsubinski. Do you know where the last stop of the metro red line is? Academic Stechko?
Yep.
You know where Lavina Mall is?
No.
Okay, so Academic Stechko Metro, you just take a marshutka, maybe like 10, 15 minutes. You go towards the forest, and it's like really close to this area. It's kind of like this enclave. It's part of Kyiv region, but it's not part of Kyiv city technically.
Right.
Anyways, I was living there a week before they invaded. My girlfriend and I, we decided to go to her parents' place in Mukachevo because we thought maybe something will happen. And then sure enough, we watched the news. They invaded and they got very close to, our flats. We had a group chat for our JK, which is like this apartment building. And people were saying like they could see helicopters flying back and forth. Some people said they thought they saw Kadarovtsi in the forest, which is like these Kadyrov troops, like in the forest between like Irpin and
brigades.
Yeah. So it was like so wild watching this all unfold. And I'm like, wow, I've been to Bucha because that's where my doctor's office was. I've been to Irpin many times because this is where I have to go to kind of renew my documents and stuff because I was like in that region technically. So it was so surreal to see, man. And then I stayed a few months like in Mukachevo, which is Zakarpattia Oblast, Western Ukraine. And it was basically life there was like there was no war going on. There was no Trivoha air alarms. It was business as usual after like the first few weeks or after the first month of the invasion.
Wow.
Yeah, it was.
Now, you weren't far then from that. There's a dirt track, a road that goes through the woods from Kyiv to Irpin. That was the like main supply road during the liberation of Irpin. It was the only way that they could get defensive weapons and troops up there.
Yeah, that was just west of
just west of where.
Yeah.
So I was just on that road, right, in a refurbished Humvee that Zampotech is sending to the front, and we went out and we found, or not found, but they took us to the site of a rocket that had been shot down.
When was this? Recently, or
and landed in the woods.
When
The
did you go
rocket
there?
was shot down about 2 months ago.
No, but I mean, like, when were you there?
Maybe 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks. Okay.
2 weeks ago.
Okay.
And it was a great example. It was a KH-55, and it was a dud. It was one of those rockets that they screwed the warheads off and sent just to try to overwhelm air defense.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what it did, because it was shot down, and meanwhile, 3 Kinzhals got through and destroyed the thermal power plant, which is one of the reasons we're having these blackouts.
Yeah. And so I asked you already, how are you dealing with the blackouts? And you're saying that, so it's like terrorism, obviously.
Oh, it's terrorism.
It's war crime. And you said that they're working on the nuclear power plants right now, I guess, to put electricity back up? Or
Well, there was a, as I understand it, there was a disabled nuclear unit at one of the power plants that had been offline for a number of years awaiting repairs. And what they did was they got in there and they got it repaired. and that brings a whole gigawatt a day onto the grid.
Mhm.
So that's a big deal, right? I think Ukraine's I'm not sure. I'd have to look it up. I was going to say I think it's 28 gigawatts a day,
Mhm.
but I could be wrong about that. That might be with what they were exporting to Moldova last month. But anyway, a gigawatt a day is going to stabilize the power grid
Yeah, I mean, you seem
or
very
help.
yeah, you seem
Anyway.
very knowledgeable about this. So I want to ask you, if there's no further attacks on the power grid, how soon do you think it'll go back to normal?
The estimates vary. There is about $50 million worth of Estonian equipment currently getting loaded on C-130s to come down here.
Mhm.
That equipment are from old Soviet thermal power plants that had been decommissioned. So Estonia, as a former USSR satellite, had the same kind of thermal power plants as Ukraine does. They decommissioned theirs and upgraded theirs several years ago, and so they have a couple of these sitting around, and they've gone through them and they've pulled out all the generation capacity that they can send, that's still worth sending. Pulled it all out and they're sending it to Ukraine. Now that means that in those power plants that weren't physically destroyed, those components can be just plugged in, right, and made to work.
Mhm.
That's going to be a big deal. The problem is that some of these power plants have been destroyed and they need to be rebuilt. So looking at alternative options like bringing the nuclear unit online,
Mhm.
like importing more energy from Slovakia, from Poland, from Hungary, from any of the partner states that we can, is what's going to get us through the winter likely. It's unlikely that these guys have destroyed 80% of the thermal power plants in the country, and the country depends on them. And it's going to be a problem this winter.
And Ukraine is retaliating by destroying oil refineries in Russia, right?
Well, I wouldn't say that Ukraine is
Or
retaliating,
not retaliating, but
but they
they're
are
yeah.
strategically targeting oil refineries. And I cannot stress this enough, Corey, for everybody. That has no impact on the price of crude oil. These are refineries. Russia is not currently exporting refined oil products. There's a ban on it. They're keeping everything in country because the Ukrainians have been hitting gasoline depots, right? So no exports, and any price increases in the market were priced in 4 months ago. It's not affecting the price of oil. But what it does do is it bleeds the Russian war machine dry of its necessary fuels. That's a win-win for everybody as far as I'm concerned.
What is the real time impact of all of this? Like, what can we see right now on the front line or the battlefield?
On the battlefield, as I understand it, not very much. The battlefield is very static. For example, around New York and Prokofsk, you'll notice that the Ukrainians have made a little advance against Russian positions in the north, but the Russians have made a little advance against Ukrainian positions in the south. And I cringe to imagine how many lives those advances have cost them. Nobody's moving anywhere until the big $61 billion package from the US and other packages of aid from European allies manage to get to the front line and give the Ukrainians what they need. That front is not going to move much. However, in terms of real-time impact on hits against the oil depots, hits against the refineries, the real-time impact is that it's crushing the Russian economy. The price of gas is through the roof. The price of durable goods is through the roof. Real earnings are up, at least in the manufacturing sector. That's true. But the effect on the average Russian, particularly pensioners on fixed incomes, is increasingly devastating. There's some excellent undercover video footage of pensioners in Moscow rifling through the the garbage bins outside of the McDonald's looking for food.
Yeah, but these are the ones that I feel the pensioners. These are the ones that will probably just adapt, and this is like life now. They went through the Soviet Union, waited in bread lines. These aren't the ones that are going to protest and
No.
revolt and change the government.
No, they're the ones that are going to die of starvation when the government collapses and their pension checks stop.
Yeah.
The thing that they've put their faith in is going to destroy them, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and I know they've been so indoctrinated with all this propaganda that I don't know. They didn't even know that Putin's doing all this to them.
They don't.
Yeah.
You know, Stalin said that the Russian people are like a chicken. You can pluck them till they bleed. Then if you throw them a little corn, they'll follow you.
Wow. I never heard that before. That's good.
Yeah.
So
no, it's terrible, dude.
No, I mean that's a good phrase. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. But yeah, I want to talk to you about, you know, we're talking about aid coming to Ukraine, this $61 billion aid package, but also there's F-16s coming to Ukraine.
We hope.
Yeah, I mean, they're in the talks, I guess. It always takes like a long time, or maybe they're already here and we don't know. But either way, how do you think this will impact like the front line?
Well, you know, I'm not a military person. So I want to start by saying that. So anything that I say here is based on what I've heard from other analysts. These are not really my opinions because this is not my space. In the political space on this topic, I can tell you we had one of the ministers from Zelensky's cabinet this week say the words that the F-16s have arrived. There's no evidence to this, except the Russians have been, for the last 10 days, concentrating attacks on every airfield in the west of Ukraine that could likely house F-16s.
Really?
Oh, yeah, dude.
Wow.
Yeah, that's very clearly been the pattern of missile and drone attacks for the last 10 days.
Do you know what missiles they're sending? Like Kinzhals?
It's been a wide variety. KH-101s, 55s, Kinzhals, Zircons, some Caliber cruise missiles, and a weird one that I never heard of until just the other day that I had to look up to see what it was. And it was like an adaptive ship-to-ship missile.
I see. Oh, yeah. And then also, yeah, since you said that, I believe the Russian Navy, they moved their last ship out of the Black Sea port.
The very last Russian patrol boat that was in Sevastopol left. The 5 ships that remain in harbor there are not seaworthy.
Do you think this is a sign of something?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. They know that they're exposed in Sevastopol. You look at the satellite images of Novorossiysk, which is thank you, which is the port across the Black Sea. Every berth is full. There's a third of the Black Sea fleet is there right now. Then if you look at the satellite photos of the new deepwater port in Georgia, in Okassia,
Ossetia.
The first Russian warship has arrived there. So they're hiding them everywhere that they can. There's also another port in the Sea of Azov, and that's where the small boats are. But the last seaworthy warship has left Sevastopol.
Okay, is it because they understand that the Ukrainian, I guess, artillery or rockets, they're in range and they need to move them further?
Correct.
Okay.
So in Sevastopol, they are within range of ATACMS strikes. Those ATACMS strikes have been devastating. The 2 Rapucha-class landing ships that you see if you look at a satellite image of Sevastopol right now are riddled with holes from cluster ATACMS.
Yeah, I'm under the belief that if Ukraine takes Crimea, this is basically the end of the war for Russia. Like, Ukraine can take Donbass, but Crimea is kind of like this gem. It's like a fortress. It's really hard to mount an offensive towards the peninsula, but once you get it, it's so easy to defend. Yeah, I feel like this is the beginning of the end, like for Russia. Do you think that Ukraine should focus on Crimea?
I think they have. I mean, that's one thing I think I see too much of in the West. We don't trust Ukraine enough. We want to give our opinions. What I see is the Ukrainians keeping their eye on the prize. The prize, the crown jewel, is Crimea. And so making Crimea untenable for the Russians is everything. And what we've seen is a concerted effort to knock out all the air defense radars and air defense systems in Crimea. Hopefully, to clear the skies for the long-awaited F-16s.
And how likely do you think it is that Ukraine retakes Crimea within the next year?
Dude, I'm so bad at predictions. I can't believe this war is still going on.
Yeah.
And now the more that I learn, the more likely it is that it's going to go on longer. How likely do I think it is that Ukraine will take Crimea?
Yeah, I mean, we have 2 years of kind of evidence and stuff to kind of look through to see, how fast the shipments of weapons are coming in, how hard the Ukrainian army is fighting, how many offensives we have had. So, what do you think? Not too likely, right?
I don't know the answer to that. And here's why. Because the outcome of this war, I'm very sorry to say, but it is my opinion that the outcome of this war doesn't depend on the Ukrainians. If it did, it'd already be done. Because they're giving everything that they've got. The outcome of this war depends on whether or not we in the West have the political will to give them what they need to take Crimea and to take the cuffs off, to say, yes, you can use the Storm Shadows and the ATACMS to hit those airfields where they're running the glide bomb raids on you out of, right? That are killing civilians every day in 18 settlements up and down the front line every freaking day. Do we have the political will and the courage of our convictions at this critical inflection point in history? Because if we don't, the Ukrainians will keep fighting. But how far they will get is anybody's guess. I mean, they've already done the impossible a million times.
Yeah.
It's incredible to watch an army or a country with no navy to speak of doing what they did to the Black Sea Fleet.
Yeah. Especially the Moskva. It was, yeah.
That was a great hit.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a great hit.
And so you said it's not up to Ukraine on, how this war will end. So obviously,
in my opinion, I don't.
So obviously, you're alluding to maybe it's, the U.S. would be involved in this on how it would end because they're one of the biggest supporters of Ukraine. So let's talk about the U.S. for a second and politics. Trump, after his assassination attempt, a lot of people are now convinced that he will be the next president of the United States. He just picked his vice president's running mate, J.D. Vance. What do you make of all this, and how will it affect Ukraine?
I don't think that Trump has a snowball's chance in hell. Not even, especially with Vance. Now, Corey, think about it with me. Right? Think about American politics. What's the function of a vice president? A function of a vice president is to represent to the American people things that the president isn't good at, right? To be complimentary, so you appeal to a broader audience. Vance is a freaking light, like Trump light. He's a clone. He's got all the same failings and foibles and prejudices that Trump does, and he engages in the same kind of hyperbolic, violent rhetoric.
Yeah.
All the Democrats have to do is play all those videos of J.D. Vance saying Trump is the American Hitler. Trump is yada yada, right? I mean, he was a never Trumper, and now he's kissing the ass.
Well, yeah, they were saying that before Trump had to win votes of the evangelicals. This is why he chose Mike Pence as his previous vice presidential candidate, or running mate. But now he seems to only focus on one specific type of, I guess, constituent. I always say it wrong. My friend corrected me the other day. Constituents, yeah. And it's typically, it's working class, white, male. And he's like, okay, these are my voters. J.D. Vance will help me to appeal to them even more.
Do you know what J.D. Vance looks like to me? Like if Don and Eric had a love child. Don Jr., right, and Eric. He's got that beard, just like anyway.
He kind of reminds me of like Ron DeSantis a bit, just not as loony.
He's loonier.
Ron DeSantis just seems kind of like weird, makes weird facial expressions. He's like, I don't know, wearing boots that make him appear taller. Yeah.
Yeah, and like an out-of-work gay stripper. Those white boots that he was wearing during the hurricane.
That's what I'm saying. It's like loony, man. It's loony. Whereas J.D. Vance just seems like a douchebag.
Yeah, and he definitely is. Yeah. What are you going to do?
Yeah. But he did say that Trump, he doesn't know if Trump is, if he'll be the next American Hitler or something like this.
He did. Those
Yeah, I
those
know.
were his exact words. He compared him to the Mustache Man. It's outrageous. Now he's on the same ticket.
Yeah.
Why? Unenlightened short-term self-interest, a desire for power, and to rule. That's what these guys are all about.
So you don't think Trump will win?
Before the shooting, I definitely didn't. I wavered a little bit there in the days after the shooting. Now I'm convinced that the shooting is too far from the election for it to be a deciding factor.
Okay, right on. And say, in this hell where there's a snowball's chance. Yeah, and Trump does win. What does this mean for Ukraine?
Oh, it's a problem. It's a problem. It means a lot more Ukrainian blood will be shed. It means the war will go longer. It means it will be more devastating. And what's important for Americans and a Western audience to understand is that means that it will cost us too. Europe is the breadbasket Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe. If the hundreds of thousands of tons of wheat and grains and legumes that these folks usually put onto the world market, if it doesn't get there, we're all paying more for our bread. And while maybe that doesn't affect you too much in Livingston, New Jersey, if you're living in Senegal, that can be the difference between life and death. We can see famine in Africa. Remember, when Putin started this thing, and it's important to remember that he started it, he threatened the world with the 3 Fs, right? If you support Ukraine, I will cut off your fuel and you will freeze. He did that. If you help Ukraine, I will cut off the food and there will be famine. He failed to do that. With the destruction of the Black Sea Fleet, with the recapture of the oil platforms, the Ukrainians have exported 113 million tons of grain this year, more than pre-war numbers. The food supply is secure, though he tried it. And then the third threat he made, Corey, was fission. If you help Ukraine, I will fry you with these nukes. We cannot live in a world where genocidal maniacs can threaten us with nuclear blackmail, food insecurity, and energy insecurity. We can't live in that world. Okay. We have to stand up to this guy.
Well, of course we have to stand up to him, but he, like you said, he does have nukes. So say if you were the president of the US, what would your strategy be on how to stop Russia? I mean, would you put boots on the grounds?
No, not if I could avoid it. And that is my big concern, is that if we don't stop Russia now, or if Russia wins at all, it will be 5 or 10 years from now, American boots on the ground in a real World War III. If Russia's able to win here and then recover, there's no doubt in my mind that's our future. And so to prevent that future now, what we need is the kind of intense coalition building and cooperation between the countries in the democratic West, a stand amongst us all against the authoritarian push of the East right now. And this triple axis of evil, Tehran, Moscow, and Pyongyang.
Pyongyang, okay. What about China?
China's a problem. China's an enabler of this axis, maybe more than we are aware. There's certainly there's an increasing amount of evidence that China is supplying secondary dual-use equipment so that the Russians can keep building Iskander-Ms. Yeah. Right? That's a problem. And I don't... Now, here's the thing, though, about China. China's only interested in itself. China does not really give a hoot about Russia. When you look at the imports and exports of Russia to China, right? Yeah. Russia exports to China are 36% of their exports. Imports from China are 30% of their imports. They are completely dependent on that one country. Reverse it. China's imports, exports from and to Russia, 5% and 3%.
No.
Russia could stop all trade, or I'm sorry, China could stop all trade with Russia and not even notice.
Mhm.
Russia, on the other hand, it will devastate them.
Well, then why doesn't China do this? Is it because they're getting cheap gas and
Oh,
oil?
definitely.
Is
They're
this it?
getting cheap
Okay.
oil, they're getting cheap natural gas, and they've got their eye on North Manchuria, right? They lost North Manchuria to the Russians,
Yeah.
right, about 200 years ago. They want it back. They want it back.
What's there?
They want Vladivostok back. They want Siberia back. They want the natural resources under the ground for
There's too
themselves.
many Russians in Vladivostok, I think. Yeah, for it to be. It's like, for example, Germany wants Kaliningrad back. Like, what are you going to do with it? There's so many Russians there. You're going to deport them?
I don't think Germany wants Kaliningrad back.
I'm just saying if.
Yeah.
That would be. That's why nobody wants Kaliningrad back. There's too many Russians there. Like, you have to kick them all out, but then that's kind of ethnic
Dude, do you
cleansing.
know who the Uyghurs are?
Of course, yeah.
Okay,
it's like this
China's
Chinese
not worried
minority
about
group,
it.
yeah.
China's not worried about a bunch of Russians. They don't deal with things the way we
But
do.
Russia's worried about Russians. This is why they invaded Ukraine.
Russia is worried about Russians, and they should be increasingly. Do you know the League of Free Nations?
Yeah, this was before the UN, I guess.
No. That's the League of Nations.
Oh, League of Nations.
Sorry.
Okay, yeah.
There was the League of Nations with Coolidge that was the predecessor to the UN.
Yeah.
But right now, there is an organization called the League of Free Nations.
Okay.
And what that is are the ethnic minorities inside of Russia that want out. That want out. There's about 82 of them.
Oh, yeah, of course. I
Yeah.
mean, they're kind of autonomous republics now, right? Or they're considered republics, like Yakutia, for example, Tartarstan, I believe it is. And then those ones in the south, Chechnya and Dagestan.
Dagestan,
Yeah.
Tuva,
Yeah, Tuva, yeah.
Kyrgyzstan. The list goes on. And the beauty of these places is that Moscow doesn't want to spend any money on them, right? So they all have their own head of state, their own legislature, and their own judiciary that they run and pay for themselves. They are set up to be autonomous republics. The problem is right now they pay tribute to Moscow. Every dime that gets extracted from the extraction economy there doesn't stay with the people. It goes to Moscow. That's the kleptocratic nature of the Kremlin. If those localities can break themselves out from under the thumb of Moscow, in the same way that we're watching Armenia do, right? It's a little different because Armenia is fully independent on paper. But over the last year, we have seen them join the International Criminal Court, so Putin can't set foot there anymore. Engage in exercises with U.S. military. They're moving away from Moscow.
Yeah.
And we're going to see more of that.
But the thing is, Russia is sending a lot of these people from the republics to the front line. They're not sending people from Moscow.
It's an internal genocide, too.
Yeah.
It's not just a genocide of the
So
Ukrainians.
how can they break free when they don't have young males to
That is the problem.
run their area? Yeah.
That is the problem. Now, if you look at Bakhkordistan, there is currently an armed insurrection movement there that's made up of guys who left the country at the beginning of the full-scale invasion so that they wouldn't get drafted,
Yeah.
and then have snuck back into the country and are living up in the hills and getting weapons and trying to organize some resistance.
Yeah.
Now, what kind of future they have is anybody's guess. But you're right, Corey. When we look at Tuva, say, now there's, if I'm not mistaken, it's 366,000 Tuvans in the world. There's 13 million people living in Moscow. But if you were a Tuvan, you were 8 times as likely to be drafted into this war. He's literally depleting the ethnic minorities in the outlying provinces to fund his war, which is what the Russians have always done with their conquered territories.
Yeah.
So you're right. That is a problem.
Well, they say, in World War II, Soviet Union or Russia, they lost millions of people, but a lot of these millions, it was like Ukrainians, Kazaki, all these different nations.
It wasn't 50 million Russians.
Yeah, and a lot of people think it was just Russians, but Ukrainians, gave their lives and they were recruited, and the front line was like in Ukraine. Yeah.
Oh, all over it.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it literally ran across it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I've been to a Nazi bunker in a former Nazi bunker. It's not current Nazi bunker. A former Nazi bunker in Venetia region. It was called Werwolf. Yeah, it was like so interesting to see. And they said that Hitler made one journey to this bunker, during like World War II. So it was like, yeah, super historical, and they were trying to maintain it. Of course, it's like Ukrainian style, so it's not nothing's behind glass. You can touch everything. They're like, oh, we have an American uniform too. You want to put it on? I'm like, okay, yeah. And then they're like, do you want to hold the guns?
An 80-year-old uniform?
Yes, yeah.
Get out of here.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah. And then they were telling me a story because they found like these Nazi cigarettes, and they were saying that nobody spoke English. I was with my friend, and she translated for me. And they were saying that they found these cigarettes when they were like digging around, and then they dared like one of his colleagues to smoke one to see if they're still good. And he smoked it, and he got so sick they had to take him to the hospital.
Oh,
But
shit.
it was like so funny how they deal with all these artifacts just like nonchalantly. Let's smoke one. Let's try it out.
I would have tried it.
Yeah.
I totally would have.
I would have
admit
visited you
it.
in the hospital.
That's where I'd have been, apparently.
Exactly, man. But yeah. So I want to ask you. Say the war is over.
As
war-
it will be eventually.
Yeah, the war is over, and they complete it on Ukraine's terms. They get all the land back. Oh, what do you think the biggest problem Ukraine will have to face?
Manpower. Ukraine has a wealth of natural resources, but this war has done two things. It has killed off a whole bunch of people that the country needs, the best people. And then it's driven a whole generation away. There's 7 million Ukrainians that aren't in the country. And the longer they stay out of the country, the more comfortable they are in the school they're in, the better their language skills in their adoptive or home are, the more their life is there. People are starting to grow up and get married in these foreign locales. They are increasingly less likely to return.
No, it's true. I have a lot of friends that's went abroad because of the war, and I talked to them, and they've been there 2 years now. They basically have no plans to come back, and this is basically their home. And somebody gave me like a good, I guess, a good like way to put it. They say a Ukrainian person, they go to a nice country, for example, like Germany. They look around and they say, "Wow, like our country back home, we can do this. I know. I wish our country was more like this." And then a Russian goes to the same country and says, "Wow, I hope this country will be like ours, so we can like." Oh, I said the joke like all bad. I don't know if the phrase like all bad, but basically, a Ukrainian goes and they see like the good things about like the space they're in. They go, "Wow, we need to do this at home, at our home." And a Russian comes over here and they go, "Wow, this should be our home." Yeah, and so they kind of want to take over, and yeah. I mean, I said it like all stupid, so sorry, guys. I've been this light has been shining in my eye the whole time. I'm getting brain dead. But I think, yeah, this is like a good place to end it. So yeah, our time is just about up as well. So I'll tell you what, Peter. If you want to plug your social media, or if you want to say anything, last thing to the camera over here, you're more than welcome to do that. Maybe any organizations that you want people to support, or actually, before we do that, what is something that's people at home? Say they're watching from the US or Europe and they're not coming to Ukraine, they don't plan to, but they want to help. What do you think is the best way they can help?
Probably United 24, right? United24.gov.ua is kind of the central volunteer and gifting interface for Ukraine. And so that's a thing. If you want to help in your locale, anywhere that there's a Ukrainian church, anywhere that there's a Ukrainian diaspora, a Ukrainian community, there are people in that community that are working on local projects that you can be engaged in. Run the big wheel at the fundraiser or whatever. There's a million things you can do. The biggest thing that you can do is vote, if you're an American, is vote in November and vote on the side of democracy against authoritarianism. If we want the world of democracy and prosperity to continue, what we will see is a world just like Russia's, where all of the wealth is concentrated in the hands of the few, and 1 in 5 people don't have an indoor toilet because there is a permanent underclass created. That's what these people want in the West. It's just like you said. Russia goes someplace nice. They want it for themselves so they can make it like home.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah,
no.
they don't want to change anything about their home. They just want to, make this new home like their old home.
They want to steal it.
Yeah, basically.
Right. That's not how culture works.
Yeah.
That's not how culture works. It took us 200 years to get to this.
That's really sad. But anyways, yeah, plug your socials, plug something, and then I'll just like wrap it up.
Right on.
Yeah.
So everybody, I really appreciate you sticking with us through this conversation. I hope that it was something that was of interest to you. My name's Peter Alexievich, which is not an easy name. By the way, if your first alphabet is Latin. But you can find me on the Tickety Talk on YouTube. Pytor is the correct spelling of my name. Pytor. Alexievich. Peter Alexievich.
Peter Alexievich. Well, it was nice having you. So thanks so much for watching, guys. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to leave a comment and, chat with Peter or I in the comments section, go ahead and do that. Thanks again for joining us. And thank you so much, Peter, for being a guest on the podcast. What I like to do at the end of the podcast, I like to come over here with the guests, shake hands. So thank you so much for coming down, man.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it, brother.